Co-News Director here at KHTS Radio, and I have the pleasure of being here with Cary Quashen, the CEO and founder of Rehab Center here in Santa Clarita, and the one, the only, the famous Austin Dave. Woo. Welcome to the show, you guys. Thanks for coming.
You had to do that for him, right? Now look at his head.
Woo. Yeah, hopefully he can get that shirt off tonight.
Oh. Exactly.
Well, thank you guys for being here. Austin and Cary, you guys have had a lot of experience working together, making a documentary series called In the Shadow of a Pandemic. And this documentary talks a lot about drug use in the Santa Clarita Valley and getting people the help they need to fight drug addiction. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but just to start off, let's talk about, just in summary here, what the main problem with the drug world is, amongst other problems with the drug world. But what's the main problem right now people are facing with drugs in the Santa Clarita Valley and around the world as well?
You want to take it? You want me to take it?
Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's drug right now. It's worse than it's ever been in history. And I was talking to a group of people the other day, and this is just for everyone out there to think about. Tell me one drug today, one drug that's not physically and emotionally addictive. You can't come up with one. So I'm always saying, when it comes to kids now and experimenting with drugs, or anyone, if you have an addictive personality and you try something and you like it, you're really screwed. Because everything is physically and addictive right now, and emotionally, of course. So we're facing so many different things right now, worse than, like I said, ever. I've been screaming for 10 years that it's going to be worse than the 70s, that the opioid epidemic is here and coming, even worse. And remember 2 years before the pandemic of COVID, what was on the news always?
Shooting, stabbings, murders.
Opiate overdoses and all that kind of stuff. The pandemic came and everything got swept under the carpet except for the pandemic. So people stopped talking about the opioid epidemic. But it didn't go away. People that were using before the pandemic drugs started using more drugs. People that drank started drinking more alcohol. People that had anxiety had more anxiety. So everything multiplied. And as Austin says, what they didn't take in consideration is, and I don't know that they could have, maybe you can help me with this one, but when it comes to mental health and substance abuse, when the stay-at-home order came out, what were people doing? Mm-hmm. They were more depressed. They were drinking more. And it got worse and worse and worse. So the opioid epidemic came, and then the DEA and the Medical Association realized, hey, we're creating drug addicts. People are leaving hospitals. They're addicted to high-potency medication, pain meds. People were getting surgeries, and all these drugs, again, are physically and emotionally addictive. So the doctors in the DEA decided, we can't write these anymore. Now, you got the pandemic. You got people that are using more drugs than ever before. So the demand is higher than ever. And what happened? Bang! They cut the supply. Instead of getting 90 pills with 3 refills, they were getting 5 pills, 10 pills, maybe 30 with no refills. So where did people usually get their medication from? Docs. The dealers would send people to docs. They would doctor shop, and they would get them. All that went away. There were no more drugs anymore, so fentanyl came into the picture. And I'll let Austin talk about that.
Let me paint you a picture for a second. You look at how things were going before the pandemic. Life was normal as it could be, right, for what we could expect. No one saw the pandemic coming. But you look at how people were dealing with their feelings, how people were, essentially, trying to silence how they felt and trying to hide the trauma, trying to hide all those different things. And those people had options. You go back 10 years ago and the court could order someone to say, hey, you're going to rehab. Right. That's where you're going to serve your time. Not necessarily, incarcerating you and putting you in jail, but sending you to a rehab.
They give you an option.
Right, they give you an option. And most people would take that option. They turn around. They become productive citizens in society. They deal with those feelings. They deal with what's really driving them there. Then you look at how the laws have changed and how, people are no longer getting that option because if you look at it now, having drugs or possession of drugs, yes, it's a crime, but is it really a high crime? No. Is it really a majorly punishable crime? Not commonly. And you start seeing people not really going into these places where they would get help. In jail, as many people that say that, jail is not the option. For these people, taking you away from your environment, from the people who lead you there, from the people that give you that stress and that emotional, angst, was good. It kept you away from the drugs for the most part, and you came out of jail clean. Or you went into rehab and got out of rehab clean. Now people aren't going there anymore, and you're seeing people, trying more dangerous drugs. And
well, all the drugs are more dangerous.
Right. So, and that's the thing. They're starting to really put things into the drugs nowadays.
So, Cary, you being more so of a drug expert, I guess we can call it, being someone who works in a rehab facility and things like that. I don't know much about drugs. I know names. I know there's heroin, methamphetamine, there's Xanax, marijuana, and then there's fentanyl. To me, these are all just a bunch of names. But you and Austin mentioned that fentanyl came into the picture now.
Right.
Why is that so significant?
Well, it's going back to what I said earlier, is the doctors they stopped writing.
Right.
So there is no more pills. People that were using pills, there aren't anymore.
But explain why fentanyl.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So
what happened is it left a huge opportunity for fentanyl to come into the picture and the cartel. First, let's face it, it comes from, where does it come from? China. So China was sending it out, and they still do, but really it's going into Mexico right now. And the cartel are making, they have pill mills. And what's really crazy? I mean, you can go online and you can buy a pill pressing machine right now. And you can make any pill look like whatever you want, but the fentanyl is going in from China to Mexico, and the pills are being brought into this country. So what I want everyone to know is, every time you buy something today, if you're not getting it from a pharmacist, if you're not going to the pharmacy and getting a prescription, chances are 90% that pill is not real. It looks real, but it's not. It's fentanyl laced pills. And they're saying, this is so scary, man. 110,000 people, they're saying, died from an accidental overdose in the last year, right? Isn't that what the latest number was? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's 110 people that died from an accidental overdose. What about the people that committed suicide because of substance abuse? How about the people that crash cars? How about domestic violence? How about child molestation? How about robberies and murders? You want to know what the real pandemic is? That's what it is. But the other problem is I was actually putting somebody in rehab today before I came here. And the same story I hear every freaking time. I said, tell me what's going on, what got you here. He says, well, I've been Narcan 4 times in the last month. Tell them what that means.
And that's the thing. That was uncommon pre-pandemic. I mean, it was kind of getting there. Pandemic really did. It was really more of a veil that went over everything. You really felt like things had stopped. But, the fentanyl itself really wasn't. So it's cheaper to put fentanyl into drugs than it is to put anything else, to actually give you the real drug. And fentanyl is basically a painkiller that was used commonly in patches for, cancer patients, people with nerve damage, things like that they found a way to, take it in its powder form and put it into opioids. So, you go on the streets, maybe you play football, right? Mm-hmm. Or you're in the wood shop and you accidentally slice off your finger. Or maybe mangle it, right?
Yeah. It sounds really painful.
It is really painful. But say maybe you pull a muscle in the wood shop. Something a little less gory, right?
Yeah.
And, you go to the doctor says, okay, I'm going to prescribe you 10 OxyContin. And that's it. But if you go back in time, what the standard issue, number of pills you got for surgery was?
I do not.
100 Vicodin.
Really? With 3 refills.
With 3 refills. Yeah. So you can get a total of 300 Vicodin. Now, after a few, guess what? You're hooked. Your body needs it. It's depending on it. So you look at people and how they get there. It's not that they wake up one day and say, hey, you know what I want to do today? I want to mow the lawn, give the dog a bath, and do drugs. Nobody wakes up saying that.
Right.
These are people who, fall into it by accident. that didn't know any better, but the chemicals and the drugs make you dependent. So these are people who are feeding into this. So they're going on the streets after the doctor, because doctors can't do that anymore. They can't give you 100 Vicodin. That's insane.
Well, they're not going to write it, one. And number two, there's something called the CURES program. The CURES program now, meaning if you go to a doctor and you want a prescription for something, they type your name in, and it's a national database, so they know every prescription you have gotten, period. So doctors aren't going to write them.
Mm-hmm. So now the availability of the pills is less. So now you're going to the streets looking for drugs that aren't being sold by a pharmacy, aren't being prescribed by a doctor. Right. So you go out in the streets and into the black market, and now you're finding these drugs that aren't real. They look like it, they feel like it, they might taste like it, but they're not. They're fake. And they're made to look like drugs so they can make a quick buck, take that opportunity. But the problem is nowadays, here's what's changed. They've put fentanyl in it. And fentanyl is not dealt with in milligrams. It's dealt with in micrograms. And I know many drug dealers and chemists were not necessarily the best math majors, but you can't mix up milligrams with micrograms. What ends up happening is not necessarily that you get an F on your test, is that somebody dies. So you look at it in that sense that you have people dying that weren't normally dying before. Sure, we have Narcan. I can't tell you how many people I've seen over the course of the last few years carrying Narcan now.
Yeah.
And you go back 10 years ago, that was highly uncommon. You didn't have that availability of that drug.
I actually know families where their younger children are trained to give Narcan in case their older brothers and sisters overdose. And I'm talking 7 and 8 year olds. Mm-hmm. It's really frightening. I was like today, I was talking to that person. He overdosed 4 times. It was Narcan back to life 4 times from buying these things on the street.
And so explain the dangers of fentanyl. Why is it so deadly? What is it? It's a lot more powerful than...
It's 50 or 100 times more powerful than heroin.
And that's why it's becoming so problematic.
And also, I mean, at first, the drug users were like panicking about it. And they were worried about, okay, am I getting fentanyl? Am I getting heroin? Am I getting Vicodin? Am I getting fentanyl? Right now, it's to the point where they don't care. Yeah. They're actually looking for fentanyl because really that's all that's out there right now.
Yeah. Right.
You're not going to find real drugs.
The common person might say, well, you're killing off your clientele. But here's the catch, is money is everything to these people. Yeah. Money talks. It's everything, And... Right. What's the cost of a human life? What's the price tag there? That's the question you really want to ask yourself. If you're finding yourself on the streets selling these, poison pills, what is the price tag of a human life?
But you know what? My dealer wouldn't do that to me. My dealer knows how much he's put. No, because your dealer is buying them from who?
Exactly.
Whoever's making them. Now, let's face it. They're not really chemists that are making them, and they're not brain surgeons. If you were to cook... Here's something you could look at. If you were to cook chocolate chip cookies and you put too many chocolate chips in that cookie, what's going to happen? It's going to taste yummy.
Yeah.
What happens if you're making prescription pills and you put too much fentanyl? Everybody takes those pills and die.
And you start seeing deaths in batches.
Yeah.
That's what we started seeing, I want to say, in 2016, 2017, where we had the 8 overdoses, 1 fatal in the bathroom.
Yeah, the park, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The park.
And I knew most of those kids. You know that.
It was a really weird wave. And that was... Here's the thing. People are very quick to say, it was a bad batch of, OxyContin. I don't know really of a good batch.
Right.
But bad batch is not... a bad batch. It's intentional.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If you put too much fentanyl, which is, you look at 3 grains of sand, that's enough. Yeah. But people are putting in way more, enough to kill 8 people in 1/2 pill.
That's wild.
You know who finds these people? Usually it's mom, dad, brother, sister, husband or wife. Usually they're found dead in their bedroom. Mm-hmm. You know what else? We're talking about Narcan. What I've noticed, when somebody overdoses on a really fentanyl, it's not going to be 1 hit of Narcan. Sometimes up to 4. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these addicts or drug users are carrying a box which has got 2 in it. If it's fentanyl, 2 isn't going to work.
Especially if you're doing the same batch of drugs with a friend.
Right. So I want to back up a little bit. Right. So we got to we got to the point where people are starting to get involved in fentanyl-laced drugs. Let's talk about how these people got to this point. A lot of people out there, even before the legal age of 21, people start drinking alcohol. Some people smoke cigarettes. Occasionally, they get into vapes. There are people who are able to drink responsibly their entire life. If you want, I know this is a controversial topic here. You could smoke marijuana for your whole life and never let it be an issue. But when do these drugs, whether it's marijuana, cigarettes, tobacco, alcohol, when does this become a gateway drug into something more serious? It's going to lead someone to the possible run-ins to with fentanyl or heroin or things of that nature.
Well, first of all, let's face it. What is the gateway drug? Everything's a gateway drug. It could be whiskey. It could be beer. It could be wine. It could be pot. It could be pills. It could be anything. If we treat two different kinds of addicts. Number one addict is when we're young, we all have what I call contracts. Remember those? Mm-hmm. When I grow up, I want to be a radio newsman or a film director, whatever the deal is. And those things change. We also have another set of contracts. When I grow up, I'll never. Remember those? I'll never drink alcohol. I'm never going to smoke cigarettes because it causes cancer. I'm not going to use drugs. I don't want to be like my dad. That kind of stuff. And what happens is little Johnny goes to school and he's looking at the people hanging over on the corner, and they look pretty cool. And they got a cigarette dangling from their mouth, and all the girls are hanging out. And he says, I want to be part of that group. And he goes over and he starts hanging out, and eventually somebody says, hey, Johnny, want one? He tries to give him a cigarette. Now it's vapes, right?
Yeah.
And he says, no, I don't want a cigarette, but because he knows they cause cancer. But after being there every single day for a period of time, he's getting desensitized to that cigarette or that vape, and he takes his first hit. What did he do? He broke a contract that he made when he was in kindergarten. This is to the parents out there. This is really sad. When I run groups in middle schools or elementary schools, we tone it down. We talk about peer pressure and that kind of self-esteem. And at the end of every group, there are kids crying. At the end of every group I've ever ran with little kids, younger kids.
Yeah.
And it's always the same thing. And I look at them and say, what's wrong? And they go, is my mom going to die? I said, why, honey? Because she smokes cigarettes. Is my dad going to die? Because he drinks too much alcohol. So that's just to the parents. But what happens is little Johnny, go back to that, goes hang out with his friends, and somebody finally takes his first hit. He just broke a contract. How does he make that okay? It's only a vape or a cigarette. I'll never smoke pot. But wait a minute, dude. It's only marijuana. It's natural. God put it there for us to smoke. It's legal. Well, where does opiate come from? It's natural. How about cocaine? From a plant.
Yeah.
Would you smoke poison oak? Maybe if I told you, it'd get you high. So, but if you're an addictive personality, and you're that teen that is starting to smoke cigarettes and vape and has a sip of beer, and then goes to a party one day, and somebody says, "Hey, want to try this? What is it? It's meth." Oh no, I'll never use hard drugs. But he drinks a little bit more and he smokes a little bit more pot, and somebody says, "You sure?" And he takes, "Oh, what the heck?" And he takes one hit. If he has an addictive personality, how many hits do you think it takes to get you addicted to that drug?
Just one.
Because why? Because it's a shortcut to the pleasure zone of your brain, and it just made you feel different and better than anything you ever felt before in your life. How do you tell someone 14 years old or 48 that something that made them feel that freaking good is bad?
So how do you explain to a parent?
But that's the one addict,
right?
Then you have the other ones now. I just want to, so we can put it in perspective, and we're treating a lot of these now, and that's what you call the accidental addict. Like Austin said, they go to a doctor, they get a prescription, they hurt their back, they're on pain meds. Pain meds are terrific. I was talking to somebody about muscle relaxers earlier, about Soma. This person is, I get these huge, terrible muscle cramps, and the doctor gave me Soma. Now, these drugs are great for a short period of time. But like you said, after any period of time of taking Vicodin or any kind of opiates or muscle relaxers or Xanax or those kind of drugs, you get physically addicted to those drugs. And then you try to stop them, guess what happens? The pain comes.
Right.
And it tricks you to believe you still need those.
So when you're looking at something like alcohol, and you have you don't want to have parents all of a sudden be freaking out because their kid turns 21 and has some buddies over, and they show up with a 6-pack of beer and they open up a beer. That's pretty normal. How do you explain to these parents that just because their friends come over and they're 21 and they're drinking beer doesn't mean they're going to become an addict? You don't want to freak parents out. So how do you find out if you have an addictive personality, or when do you start addressing the problem with your children, especially if they still live at home, because you care about your kids?
Right. I think that, first of all, you could tell that somebody has an addictive personality when they're 5 or 6 years old. They want you, Mom, will you buy me a Super Bowl? How about 40 of them? How about lip gloss? How about every flavor? You could actually see that kind of personality coming out. So you got to kind of watch out for that. And beware, because you could actually feel that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But also, you go with your gut, man. You know what's going on as a parent.
Yeah.
If your kid's in trouble and you're watching, okay, they have some friends over and they have a beer every once in a while. Now every once in a while turns into every Friday night, and then every Friday night turns into every Friday and Saturday night, and then becomes more. Then you kind of know what's going on. So this is just to parents and anyone else. Go with your gut.
Right. Well, on the other side of the break, I want to talk with you two about just what drugs do to you. Austin, being a field reporter, he sees a lot of things firsthand. People fresh off of a dose of narcotics, how they react to law enforcement, how they are in public. I want to talk to you two about that, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the documentary you guys are working on, which has won some awards. So on the other side of the break, we're gonna talk about that stuff. This is Louie Diaz, Co-News Director, here with Austin, Dave, and Cary Quashen, talking about the drug pandemic, epidemic that's going on around the world. So let's talk about what drugs do to people. A lot of these kids and adults, not just to single out kids, but they're good people, and they get hooked on a narcotic of whatever it may be, and do crazy stuff. Austin and I both have a huge passion for monitoring police scanners and listening to different things that are going on at the Valley. I think Austin's level of doing that is a little more than mine.
No.
He says he sleeps with the scanner on. I believe it.
Yeah.
So I'll find out if that's true.
And unlike me, Austin, you go to these calls when someone overdoses or if someone commits a robbery. A lot of these crimes, more than likely, not all of them, but more than likely, are probably caused because someone's on drugs and they're not thinking, or they're doing something to get money for drugs. So let's talk about what's going on in people's minds when they're on certain drugs that make them do crazy things. Are they doing it because it just sounds fun, or are they doing what they have to do to get money or to get the drug to keep them going along?
You look at it like this. You kind of break down the equation. You know when you go on vacation and everything's great, you've departed your normal reality and everything's good and the sun feels great on your skin. You feel like I want to go eat this, and sleep and not have to wake up early. Everything's great, right?
Yeah.
When you do drugs, it's kind of like you're taking a vacation from your own reality. You're departing your own reality for a vacation zone. But vacations cost money, right?
Correct.
Well, drugs do too. So you look at it like this. When you want to take that drug, you feel good. You feel really good. And then it stops. But then you want to, when you come back from vacation, you're like, wow, I want to go back on vacation again. I don't want to go to work. Well, drugs work the same way. You want to get that feeling back, that high. And then you need to go buy more. But what happens when, you start spending more money, chasing that high, then you run out of money. You still need the high, right? You still need to go on that vacation, that little mental vacation. Then you start committing crimes because you need that money. You start robbing things, or robbing people for their things. You start, stealing. You start, manufacturing illicit drugs. You start, this vicious cycle that really feeds into it and just perpetuates it until you hit a point where it's not sustainable. You start, distancing yourself from your family. You start really breaking away from all the things that keep you grounded, from all the people that hold you accountable, that keep you safe, because they don't understand. I'm on a vacation. Like, you should support me. I'm happy.
Right.
And then pretty much you have a really big rift in the family. You have a really big rift with your friends. You start to not show up for work, or you show up late. Then you start to not show up at all. Then you lose your job. Then you lose your home. And then where do you have to go after that? You have no friends. You have no money. You have no home. You have no job. You have no source of actual stability. What's left but rock bottom?
Right.
You fall, hit rock bottom, and then you land on the streets. And then you start seeing a lot of what we see in Santa Clarita, where you have a lot of transient-related crimes, where you have people who, you know, it's not just these people who do it. Don't get me wrong, but you have a lot of transient-related crimes where you're seeing people who have no home going into stores, stealing things, going into this place, stealing someone's purse, you know, breaking into cars. And you see, you know, just about an hour ago, we had a grand theft in Canyon Country off of Rainbow Glen and Soledad, where someone was cutting off a catalytic converter. And then you start seeing them selling these things, and that starts rising. And what is it feeding? Like you said, more likely than not, it's feeding some kind of drug habit.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is it costs money to pay for that vacation.
And I believe that's where...
They have to use, too. I mean, it's not... Because if they don't, they get what you call dope sick. Mm-hmm. And somebody... I don't know... It's hard to explain what dope sick is. Think about the flu on steroids plus. So if they don't figure a way to get that drug, they're going to be really sick. I mean, sick to the point where their skin hurts, their head hurts, their stomach hurts, they're vomiting, they have the runs, their hair hurts, the bones hurt. So they got to get well. So
right.
somebody, you take... So drugs make good people do bad things. Drugs turn good dreams into nightmares. So it becomes horrible for this person.
Yeah, and I believe... That's where you two got the inspiration, especially you, Austin, to create this documentary you guys have been working on, The Shadows of a Pandemic. And the two most recent interviews, or episodes, I should say, they're very heart-wrenching. They talk about you guys helping a female named Jennifer get off the streets. And she talks about how she's doing this for her kid, Milo. There was also a kid in that episode with the name of Dominic who overdosed 9 times. Twice, or what was it, twice or 4 times? Twice in one day.
From the same pills, from the same bottle.
Mm-hmm. And there was something in there that was said, which was instructed by you, Cary, which hit home. And it was a true statement. You can tell it was by the way he said it. You made him look at his father. Mm-hmm. And you made him say, I love my drugs more than I love you.
Right.
And he admitted that was true. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the people you work with. Because in the other episodes, there's these kids who just die. Yeah. They accidental overdose. Dad tells them don't go out. They go out anyway.
Yeah.
And these drugs are ripping apart families. Some of these people that are dying, it's their only kid. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Austin, where did you get the idea to do this documentary? And I kind of already explained it, but let's go into more of the weeds of how you guys come across these people and how you get them to get the help that they need.
This kind of goes back to about 2016 when we saw our first wave of overdoses, but not just overdoses. We had one fatality, and that was unusual. You know, someone finding someone dead in a park bathroom in Santa Clarita is highly unusual. Mm-hmm. And I remember staying up that night and tracking overdose calls. I kept hearing overdose over the radio, which was very different. It's very odd. Nowadays, like, you know, you and I both listen to it, and it's not uncommon at all. It's uncommon if you don't hear it.
Right.
But back then, you know, terrible. We heard it, you know, every hour. Overdose, you know, overdose. We ran out of paramedic squads, ran out of ambulance. And it's a whole, you know, weird change of events that happened overnight. And the next morning I called the hospital and I asked them, I said, hey, you know, do you have a, you know, influx of overdose cases? And they said, I don't know. And they checked, and it turned out that they did. They had a series of overdoses in the ER, and it was unusual. And so they ended up having a press conference about 3 o'clock that afternoon. And I can tell you that I hadn't slept all night, so I was really tired, really cranky. But I saw this guy, Cary Quashen, at the press conference. And, you know, I had seen some of his work and what he does in the community, and I, you know, was packing up my stuff, and I said, you know what? Should I go talk to him? Should I reach out? Should I ask questions? I was like, I don't know. And I did. Mm-hmm. And he was super approachable. And it was interesting, having the conversation with you. I'd asked you at the very end, I said, you know what, I'm just going to, take a chance.
Right.
And I asked you if you can do a Q&A with me. So we did about a half-hour Q&A on Facebook Live, just asking questions. And there were so many people watching and listening that had no idea about any of these things.
Which we need to do again, by the way.
We do. And it's for me, what puzzles me the most is the lack of knowledge and the lack of awareness. And you would think that people would know, and you have a couple of different mentalities, though, that kind of prevent you from knowing. And it's the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard, the this won't happen to me, this is not my family, this is other families, none of these things happen. But I can tell you, based off of what I've seen talking to so many different families over the last few years, everyone kind of thought that. And you really look at that and you go, well, you're saying it can't happen to you, but I can give you a whole list of people who said the exact same thing, and now they're missing a member of their family this Thanksgiving. This Christmas is extra difficult because...
And for whoever's listening, if it can't happen to you, then who does it happen to?
Yeah.
It happens to somebody, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's like you said, people always say not my kid, but it's someone's kid. That someone could be you. And it's not that, anyone's out there to try to scare anyone, but at the same time, from my perspective, seeing what I've seen out in the field, this is the truth. This is what happens, and it's happening right now. So the documentary, the idea for it, just came out of just us needing to do more, to keep people informed, to show people. And like you said, it's heart-wrenching. It is heart-wrenching, sitting there listening to someone who, just lost their child.
We actually did an intervention before we did the documentary on somebody that you came and we did, and from there, we just saw how terrible it was, and you decided, let's do documentaries.
Yeah, there was that phone call I got that one day that Cary had offered me an opportunity to sit and watch. And the family actually was comfortable with having a camera in there. So, for me, it's not necessarily exploiting anyone or anything. It's very much showing people, giving them a glimpse into something that you can stop today and keep that from happening to your family. But this is what it looks like. And so doing a documentary is really kind of the best way for me to put someone there. The one thing we don't do as a society today is put ourselves in the shoes of others. We have stopped thinking about how someone else feels based on something. We've stopped thinking about someone else's, predicament, and we cast judgment instead. But how about we look into a glimpse of what someone else's life is like for a moment and put ourselves in their shoes again as a society.
Right.
Austin and I were, when we did Jennifer's episode, we were down by the freeway where some homeless people live, and you look at these people, if you don't think about it, if you just go, oh man, they're drug addicts and they're homeless. Well, before they were drug addicts and they were homeless, they had a story. They were somebody's son, they were somebody's mother, they were somebody's father, and circumstances got them there. So everybody has a story.
And that's the thing, we cast judgment on those who are homeless. And we make them out to be this monster, but in reality, they're just like you and me. At any point in time, you and I you could trip and fall and hurt your arm and get hooked on Oxy. I could get hit by a car and get hooked on something as well. Yeah. And it happens just like that, where, these people didn't, like I said in the very beginning, they didn't wake up this morning and say, I'm going to go do drugs. It just happened.
Well, look at Jennifer, for instance. She was a nurse before that. Before getting hooked on drugs. She was a nurse.
So when people have loss of family members to drugs, there's always push for legislation. DUI, driving under the influence of an alcoholic beverage, became illegal to prevent people from driving drunk and causing injury. Yet it still happens. There's a new law that is either just became law or is about to become law in New Mexico, where if you're a drunk driver and you kill a parent who has minors, you will be ordered to pay child support.
Yes.
I also saw in your documentary there was legislation trying to be passed to hold drug dealers accountable and things like that. Laws are there for a reason, but do you believe, Cary and Austin, legislation is what it's going to take? Do you think drug dealers care that they could be arrested for murder if they sell a fatal overdose of pills. Does that really matter to them? Is legislation really going to be what stops this problem?
I mean, for me, it's what would stop the problem with anything is understanding. It starts with understanding. I think that we try to legislate our way out of things, some cases, without understanding. You know, you see people coming up with laws that really have no ties to what they're legislating.
Right.
And so it really starts with understanding, being able to listen to someone who has been affected by something, and then legislate. SB 350 is the law you were talking about, which basically was named Alexandra's Law. And it, for the most part, the kind of gist of it was that it would, if someone was caught dealing drugs, they would be warned that, you know, hey, if this leads to the death of someone, then you know, you're going to be held liable for murder. Just like DUI. When you're caught for DUI and you crash your car or whatever it may be.
You can be liable for murder. Not
right.
You will be. You can be.
Right. They warn you and they say that if you crash your car again and it results in the death of someone else, you can be charged with homicide. And we've seen that occur here in Santa Clarita a few years ago as well. And that was one of the first few cases where you saw that going that way. This would basically warn drug dealers that if you continue dealing and it leads to the death of someone directly as a result of your negligence, then you can be charged with homicide. And that's basically simply what it was. It enabled the district attorney offices within the state of California to, you know, pursue homicide charges for someone who has led to someone's death. And so you saw, you know, this is just from my perspective, but if you know, in the second episode of the documentary, you kind of see that thing I was talking about, kind of a lack of understanding,
right?
Where people don't necessarily understand someone else's case. It kind of goes back to putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right?
Right.
And how can you? How can you put yourself in someone's shoes that just lost their 16-year-old son?
Right.
You can't.
Right.
You could say, "Oh my God, it must be terrible."
Yeah.
But you can't put yourself in that spot.
They kind of alluded to during the Senate committee hearing, they kind of alluded to putting, instead of, you know, going after the drug dealers, they wanted to put fentanyl on trial. And that statement alone kind of gives you some indication as to what their mindset is on how they're legislating. And so it starts with a basic, broad sense of understanding someone. Understanding, you know, that you and I are not identical. We may have the same organs, yes.
Right.
But we have two completely different backgrounds. And so for me to understand you, I have to ask questions. I have to take, you know, some kind of investment. For me to understand Cary, I have to invest in his life and really, you know, listen.
Correct.
You know, listen first, be quick to listen and slow to speak. And I think that if we were to really start there for anything, I think that we would see the world a much different place. Less judgment, more understanding, more, you know, laws that make sense that hopefully protect people from things like DUI and drug addiction.
But I will say this though, federally now. When there's an overdose and the DEA gets involved in it and it becomes a federal charge, it's a 20-something year minimum now. Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing.
So quick question before we have to take another break, and then I want to come back and talk about the help you guys provide, especially helping parents of lost ones, their children. Like Dominic said, sometimes, and most of the time when you're addicted to a drug, you care more about those drugs and your parents and your friends than others. So with that being said, even if law passes, they're going to love their drugs and their job and the money more than those laws. So how will that help though?
Mental health. That's really the answer. You know, we throw more money into all these different things, but we really don't look into the mental health of the people that we're looking at.
And education.
Yeah.
If we don't start teaching here's the deal. You hear fentanyl's bad and fentanyl's killing people. And before fentanyl, it was opiates on television and the news. What you don't hear is drugs kill, drugs are bad.
Right.
So what message are we giving people really? It's okay to smoke weed. It's okay to do this. It's okay, but don't use hard drugs. Nobody wakes up in the morning and decides, you know what, I'm going to shoot heroin today.
Right.
They break their contracts. So if we don't educate children young that all drugs starts innocently and can end tragically, that's where we're losing them.
And you look at it in a sense of, you know, it's like DUI. You take away the car keys, you impound the car, right?
Right.
Person goes to jail for a couple hours, sobers up in the, you know, the tank in jail, and they go home, right? But at what point in that process did we deal with what led that person to make that decision in the first place? We haven't.
Right.
and drug addiction. We arrest people, we take away the drugs, we do this, and you look in LA County, this person is out of jail before they're done with the paperwork.
Yeah.
Out, capering, doing the same crimes,
Right away.
At what point did we intervene and deal with the mental health situation of the person? It's
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. We got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk in our last section here about the help you guys provide people and how you get them that help. This is Louie Diaz with Austin, Dave, and Cary Quashen. On this last segment here with Austin and Cary, we're going to talk about how you Cary, being with Action, how you get people to get the help they need when sometimes you can't always force someone to rehab. So how do you encourage people to get the help they need? And also for parents that have lost, whether it's one of their children or if it's, their only child, how do you work with the parents after the death of a child of an overdose to prevent them from falling victim to drug addiction?
Well, let's first hit the person that needs help. How's that?
Yeah.
I mean, people don't just wake up and out of nowhere say, I want to get sober today. Usually it's got to be some kind of earth-shattering event that caused that. I hear from people all the time, I got to wait for him to hit bottom or her to hit bottom. If we wait for people to hit bottom today, we're going to bury a lot of people, a lot more people. And that's something that I believe, we can pull the bottom out from people. We can do interventions. If we have the right equipment and the right people and the right environment, we can do an intervention and kind of muscle somebody emotionally into treatment. So it's something that we should always look into. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, most people don't go to rehab because they just want to get sober. Most people go to rehab because of an intervention. They go to a rehab because they're strung out on fentanyl or they can't get the drugs that they want, so they want to quit that drug. So when they get to rehab, it's now our job to teach them that it's not the fentanyl, it's all the drugs.
Right.
You can't drink anymore. You can't use drugs because it'll always get you back to the drug you love, or you'll fall in love with something else. Sadly, and Austin can help me with this one, I mean, we've seen way too many people, friends of ours now, that have lost people and children because of drugs. And it's people, I would say, think about it. How do you even say that? How do you feel the pain that somebody does that lost a child or a husband or a wife or anyone to drugs? How do you deal with when they say, I walked into my kid's bedroom and found him blue and dead? It's horrible. So you want to give people that support. Right. You want to get them into the right kind of counseling and therapy, get them involved in speaking to other people if that's where they're at. Talk to them and get them in a grief recovery group or something like that, because the pain. People say, you know what, time heals all. That's a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
Time makes it easier to deal with stuff, but it doesn't heal certain things.
In some cases, it's good to take that pain and channel it into something positive. That's with anything, really. But you look at these parents,
like a good friend of ours, Jaime.
Yeah, you channel it into something positive, and for Jaime, he's taking that pain and he's working to try to keep that pain from being experienced by other families. And he was a good driver behind SB 350. He's been going around the country and around the state, really traveling, trying to reach people who are not in my backyard, not my kid, not my family, because he doesn't want anyone to experience the pain he goes through every day of waking up knowing that your child is gone.
Right.
We need to bring him on with us one of these times.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, as we wrap up here, Austin, why don't you tell people how they can watch your documentary that you're working here with Cary and when the next episode's expected to come out?
You can go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/Austin Dave, or you can find me on Instagram. That's Austin Dave _ also on Instagram, or search me on YouTube.
Cool. And Cary, for people that are struggling with drug addiction and families that are wanting to get their loved ones help, how can they get a hold of you?
1-800-367-8336. That's 1-800-367-8336. And if you want to talk to me directly, feel free to call me on my cell. That's 661-713-3006.
Cool. Well, thank you, too, for coming in and talking with me about this problem that we're facing here with the drugs, and appreciate you sharing and shining some light on this dark subject.
Thanks for having us, Louie.
Appreciate it.
Again, this is Louie Diaz with KHTS Radio. Follow us on our social media platforms at KHTS Radio for all local news. And make sure you go to our website, hometownstation.com, where you can read all about what we report on here. And you can also sign up for our daily newsletter. This is Louie Diaz.